Welcome back to Student Hub Live. This Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences new curriculum showcase is going really, really well. We've met so many wonderful academics, and this session is no exception. We're going to be focusing on R44. So this is a qualification, the Bachelor of Arts Honours in Geography. And I'm joined by Shonal Bagwat, Kim Coleman, and Gunjan Sundhi to go through this wonderful new qualification with us. Now, Gunjan, you have brought a cup of tea, and in fact, you guys have been very versatile with some of the props. So I must then ask you about what a cup of tea has to do with geography and the geography of Britain in particular.
Well, thank you so very much, Karen, for this opportunity. I think despite what our various definitions of what it means to be a British person, the one point that people tend to converge upon quite often is the cup of tea. And so there's something very quintessentially British about it. But the conundrum here is that when you actually think about what goes into a cup of tea, which is your tea, your sugar, your milk, if you prefer, and the water, and in fact the actual cup in itself, of all of those ingredients, there's really only the milk that is really actually British. So the question arises is what actually makes this a British identity? Why is it so important that the cup of tea is so important to what it means to be British? And really what geography allows us to do is to think about the linkages and the relationalities of the global and the local. It allows us to think about the mobilities of the objects, the places, the people, and the ideas, in how does the tea becomes and comes to be part of the British identity. It's really thinking through these connections and the interrelatedness of these things that we come to think about the meaning of being British over time. And it's particularly over time that we have to think about it. It's not just a matter of that the tea comes from a particular part of the world and enters the UK, but that how has it entered the UK over time in the past, and how would it continue to do so moving forward?
So we've talked about tea as the sort of ingredient, but I guess there are more broad connotations that we could sort of link to this as well. Things like, the East India Tea Company and, the way that tea is part of that sort of colonial trade, I guess. Shonal, what's your sort of take on that aspect here?
Yeah, absolutely, Karen. I think as an agricultural crop, tea is very closely tied to the former British colonies. And there are fantastic narratives of early tea planters going into South Asia and East Africa and turning those wild landscapes into tea gardens, so to speak. And in the process, there was actually quite a lot of impact on the environment. So the way tea is planted, it leads to soil erosion, it removes all the trees in the landscape, and also the slave labor that was used in making those tea gardens is a very important factor too. I think since its colonial legacy, tea has come a long way. Today, there is a lot of discussion about fair trade tea. There is discussion about reducing the environmental impact of tea as an agricultural crop. And I think the world is sort of waking up to the fact that a simple morning brew can have such an environmental impact. So there are all these positive developments with fair trade and environmentally friendly brands of tea. I think geography is very interested in all of those processes, the cultural, social, economic, and environmental, and the whole mix that comes with a cup of tea is of huge interest to geographers.
Absolutely. Now, Kim, I wonder if you could sort of pick up on one of the points that Gunjan made earlier, which was about relationality here, and the way that things sort of bounce off each other. How are geographers interested in that?
Yeah, well, I think one idea really that requires some reinforcing is this idea of relationality, and it's a really important notion that students will learn about when they study OU geography. How different places, both near and far, relate. That really matters. It matters, for instance, because it helps us to understand why some places have become more powerful than others, and the kinds of inequalities that this creates. So, for example, you heard about the colonial origins of tea production and how its consequences are still evident today. You also heard about fair trade and sustainable tea, and these are potential ways of responding to global problems of tea production. So geography, it could be really seen as a science which is asking quite critical questions about how people, things and places relate, and also about how we could begin to address these relations to make everyday life more just and sustainable.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. HJ, how's everyone back at home? And this must be interesting news for you today, following our earlier sugar discussion, and now tea's on the cards as well, for
I
something that
know.
has wider implications than you might have initially considered.
I think there's so many things I have to give up. I got a tea just before this session, ready to sit down and take everything in, and I don't know if I can drink that anymore. I feel a bit guilty, and I've got my biscuits with plenty of sugar in, which probably aren't too good either. But I think we'll have to. This will give us some good thoughts. And in the chat, a lot of people are saying, and I think it really hits on all the modules that come up today. Mark said it in a great way as well. What I love about degree study is it doesn't matter what subject you specialise in, it makes you think about the world around you in new ways. And I think that's definitely an indication of what you get from these modules. And a lot of people who study geography as well agreed that geography was a lot more than what they initially thought of just being maps and places, but about how people work and how things are interconnected.
Absolutely. And of course, as university students, we're often learning about making cups of tea and thinking about some of the implications of some of those actions as well, aren't we? I mean, one of the things I'm very mindful of is that, throughout the discussions, as you say, HJ, today, we've spoken so much about the various ways in which things do relate to different subjects. I mean, the environment is one that's come up time and time again in so many of our discussions here. And I guess that it's another issue, again, that geographers would be particularly interested in. Kim, you've used microplastics as an example here in the module.
Right, so I brought along a plastic bag as a prop, and I think it really illustrates the fact that for many geographers, societies and environments are entangled, so they are inextricably linked and cannot be seen as separate. And over the last half century or so, we've become quite dependent on plastics. And even if we try to reduce this dependence, we're still causing untold damage to ecosystems and especially to sea life through plastic pollution. And one issue that we study, as you mentioned, is microplastics, which are like small plastic threads and particles from commercial products such as clothing or cosmetics. And these are very difficult to trace and therefore to prevent from entering ecosystems and in different kinds of environments. But this invisibility really doesn't make microplastics less harmful, because they do harm sea life, for instance, when fish ingest these toxic particles. And there's increasing evidence that plastic travel back from oceans to land through the seafood that's consumed by humans. So in this sense, the plastic bag is really a good example of our profound and also very troubling entanglement with the environment, which geographers are then investigating.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion. I know at various student hub events, we've talked about plastic bags, and in Wales, for example, they've been, there's a high price to pay for those, both socially and financially as well. And there have been massive reductions in that. HJ, how's everyone in the chat?
We're doing really well. Jeremy says it's so relevant, it crosses over to science and environment as well. There's a few people doing open degrees as well, which is really exciting. So they're thinking about how this could fit in with what they're doing. I know a lot of us are questioning our tea and our plastic use as well, and feeling a little bit guilty, if I do say so myself. Lorna is really enjoying the geography discussion, and Tala as well said that she did geography at A level and particularly enjoyed human geography. So this is very interesting as well, and it's definitely piqued her interest.
And good to see you being very ethical there, HJ, with your bag of choice of sweets and crisps, and no doubt.
Yes, that's it. All my sweets are stored in a paper bag. Very responsible. I've never used plastic bags. No.
Didn't you have a plastic there a minute ago? I'm sure there was something different.
You must be seeing things. It was definitely a paper bag there before. There's definitely no
You know,
guilt
longer.
setting in from this discussion.
Luckily, we have the catch up to notice
Ah,
such differences. So, I mean, it's one of these things I think that we can all feel very guilty about our use of plastics, etc. But that doesn't do us a huge amount of good. I mean, ultimately, you know, in academic terms, we need concepts and ways of actually using some of these to unpick and explore different things. Gunjan, how in geography do you use concepts and methods to study, I guess, this mixture that we were talking about earlier about, you know, this entanglement between humans and non-human animals in terms of something like, for example, plastics?
Well, what's geography is really useful for is the sort of the wide range and diversity of tools that is available to us and that students do learn about. So, for example, within our module DD213, and it's the second level module on environment and society, what students are in fact learning is to understand the world geographically and to understand the entanglements between humans and non-humans, the entities, the processes. So really thinking about how the wildlife and the microbes to geological formations and ecosystems, how they're entangled and related to through human interaction and humans, So it's a whole set of tools that you're offered that you are able to explore these relationships with. What you also learn as you're exploring these relationships and sort of linking the human geography to physical geography and the other science elements is the social inequalities. To recognize that environmental inequalities are also social inequalities. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we move forward and as we build a better understanding, a geographical understanding of the world and the human and non-human entanglements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd like to move on to our next point as well, because as usual, we're running out of time. And Shonal, you'd already mentioned some of the single-use plastics and some of the implications there. But I wonder if we can and think about the third section we wanted to cover so that we can do it some decency in terms of time. It's about smartphones and also about fieldwork. And so how are students learning about fieldwork and using smartphones in particular as part of the degree? Shonal.
Absolutely. I think a smartphone like this, the one that I'm holding at the moment, is a amazing tool to access technology. And I think I would like to think that we are developing a really groundbreaking and unique approach to fieldwork in this degree through the use of technology. So we start from the premise that online or offline spaces, they cannot really be separated, because the digital world has really become integrated with our everyday lives, whether it's laptops or smartphones, and you can access online spaces through these devices. So making use of digital and online technologies to carry out geographical fieldwork is something that we are experimenting with at the moment. So really kind of getting students in the physical field and the virtual field to collaborate with each other. In the
I mean,
early part of the
so I was going to point out, you know, the lockdown has just changed the way that you know, we cannot view these things as distinct anymore. And yet in the past, you know, virtual was often seen as inferior, and we've learned now that it isn't. It's just different, as you say.
Exactly, yeah. And in this degree, we sort of introduce the virtual and immersive fieldwork technology through the idea of maps and mapping, and that then builds up to the interactive mapping and leads on to the virtual and immersive fieldwork as the students go through the first to the second to the third stage in the degree. So I think in many ways we are freeing up the definition of what field in geographical fieldwork means, and really redefining what fieldwork in geography means.
Gunjan, you wanted to add something to this point about fields and the parameters of the field.
Yeah, I think so. Historically and traditionally, when someone thinks about the field in geography, there's an assumption that it's the real world that's outside, something you can touch. But I think, especially in light of the past 3-4 months around the world, and things such as gaming interfaces has really shown and made us realize that the online is not just simply something you mediate relationships through, but you have relationships in. So the online in itself is a field. Most recently, if we really look at K-pop fandom and the role they've played in terms of organizing and supporting the Black Lives Movement. And, this is all done transnationally, all online. There's no meetings in person that they meet. And yet they've managed to raise $2 million within 24 hours. So that's something, geographers really think about and say, well, what does that mean to do this online? And so the field has changed. It's no longer about what's real that's outside, but this is also real. Online is as real as outside. And how do we begin to understand that? And I think this geography degree does that in ways that has not been done yet.
Absolutely. And Kim, could you give us some examples then from the modules about some of the blended fieldwork that students might enjoy?
Right, well, so obviously one of the things that we're looking at is how to translate quite complex sets of data, which you can discover nowadays in online environments, translate those into more accessible pieces of information that can be shared with wider groups of people. And so one technique that we're exploring is infographics, which are visual representations of complex sets of data. And we're using these infographics or images to think about how to present geographical knowledge in a creative manner. And as I said, that is also accessible to the widest range of people. So studying geography and geographical fieldwork techniques can help you to develop professional skills, such as communicating in a concise and engaging way.
That's fantastic. HJ, do we have any burning questions right now?
I don't think we have any burning questions, but as always, if there's something you think of later on in the session, or if you're watching on catch up, just email us, studenthub@open.ac.uk, and our fantastic guests would love to get back to you. And I think this has been a great session for those of us, including myself, who didn't really understand what geography entailed. A lot of us just thought geography was mainly about maps, but we've realised that it's so much more, and there's so many great conversations that come through geography as well.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of appreciation for the breadth on offer here. So Shonal, as head of geography, I'm going to have to ask you just to sum up these with this final sort of thing, which is about why OU geography is unique and so exciting. So could you just give us sort of some highlights, I guess, in terms of why students should study geography with the Open University?
Sure. I think we are making a distinctive geography degree, and I think one of the reasons why this is because the transferable skills that this degree will offer to the students. So that includes collaborating with others, or carrying out independent research, or presenting your work to an audience. And all of these skills are really important for any career that you may decide to choose. And I think more importantly, a geographical lens on the world can help you to see the world in ways that you have never seen it before.
Well, you've certainly inspired many of us today. So, Gunjan, Shanil, and Kim, thank you so much for a fantastic session. We're now going to watch a video which is about the BA Honours in Geography, and then a video about the resilience of agriculture and food systems before we're back for our postgraduate sessions, our last two of today. So I'll see you very shortly after this video break.